大家好，现在是7点整。我想我们的线上讲座就差不多现在开始。亲爱的各位协会会员、群友以及各位建筑业的朋友们，晚上好！欢迎大家参与我们新洲建筑协会的10月份线上讲座。我是新洲建筑协会的 Gordon， 在这里我和我们协会的 Tom 和我们的会长 Carson 以及我们的嘉宾欢迎大家今天的参与。今天我们有幸请到了建筑安全专家 Mr. Ross Finney 来跟我们大家讨论一下有关 Whs， 也就是工作健康与安全在建筑业及企业运营中的相关要求及案例。今天的在线讲座将历时1个小时，主要是由 PPT 图文介绍以及提问与回答环节组成。欢迎大家在 Zoom 的留言板内踊跃提问，我们会在稍后的提问回答单元中一一作答。由于今天的讲座是以英语为主，所以接下来我们线上讲座会是全程英文。我们在讲座结束后会把本次讲座的中英文讲稿发给大家，谢谢大家。Shall we start? First of all, allow me to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Ross Finney. Ross is MBA registered and certified building consultant and WHS consultant, registered trainer for Safe Work New South Wales, registered trainer and assessor for industry, providing witness report and defect quality report, and also the mentoring service in building and WHS industry. He is also a licensed builder with over 4 decades of building and construction experience, and the judge for the MBA New South Wales Excellence in Housing Award. Let's put our hands together for Ms. Ross Finney. And Ross, thank you for joining us tonight.
Okay, well, thanks, Gordon, Tom, Carson. And so basically what we're doing today is just going to review some basic topics. It's a fairly broad and general concept. So you just bear with us as we go through. I know there's some question and time at the end, but you can put questions in and we'll try to get to them at the end of the presentations. So I've broken the topics for tonight into a couple of sectors. As far as the induction, we've just gone through a little bit of a broad update on some of the industry changes that have happened in the last several months. And in particular for a lot of you guys that are a member of the CBA is the work health and safety legislation. And that's basically in a snapshot because it's quite a complex document to go through. And unfortunately, we haven't got time to go through the whole document tonight. So we're going to be looking at some primary areas of duties under the WHS Act. We're going to be looking at some of the responsibilities. We're also going to be looking at some of the issues at the regulator, like New South Wales, and the PCBU obligations, and we'll explain what PCBU means as far as your business is concerned. And also a little bit about compliance and the penalties. Okay, so with the industry updates, the Building Commissioner has brought and changed the some conditions in the as far as the building industry is concerned. So they've added in special requirements that, in particular, to people that do design work within the building industry. And in a nutshell, that brings it in line with the WHS Act as far as designers' responsibilities. You can notice that there's a bit of a link there for a website. Came in late 2019. And then also there's been some changes to the WHS legislation for New South Wales. Now, even though Safe Work The Act is still classified as 2011, but it was updated in June 2019. And all the codes of practices got updated in late 2019, which is a fairly important thing to remember, is keeping up to date with the industry requirements. So when it comes to planning, planning is a key component to any business success. Doesn't matter what sort of business you have, what business you operate, whether you're a major contractor or business, subcontractor, a worker within a business. The main things that we need to concentrate on is ensuring you've got compliance and meeting a legislative framework, which we're going to touch on a little bit further. The planning before you start work, site preparation and setup, which is important. And with that comes site amenities, site security, understanding those differences, materials handling, obviously, safety management systems and plans, which is a key component to a business in the industry. Inductions, carrying out what is deemed general inductions, company inductions, site conditions and risk requirements. Also, the understanding the definition of supervision and compliance requirements in regards to the WHS framework. Operational requirements, that's talking about safe work method statements, standard operating procedures or safe operating procedures, toolbox talks, meetings, etc. And also in particular waste management, housekeeping, disposal, recycling. And one of the main areas that people have to be ensure that everyone within their business is appropriately trained. Make sure that their qualifications and VOCs, that's verification of competencies, are in line with their HR agreement or their work requirements. WHS, in short, stands for Workplace Health Surveillance and Safety. So one key element that when I do a lot of training and assessment work, especially with risk management, is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So it's a very, very key factor to remember is you need to plan. You need to plan well. If you don't plan your actions for a workplace, then you will fail, and unfortunately consequences and fines are attached to that. So we're going to talk about firstly legislative framework. So in a nutshell, we've got the WHS Act. For New South Wales, it's 2011. It's law, it tells you what you must do, okay? And the regulations is 2017. It tells you how to do it, how to comply with the Act. All right? So the Act tells you what you must do, the regulations tell you how to do it, and there's obviously associated penalties with that. So both the Act and the regulations is law, and if you think about how to run a business, that is the bare bones, the bare minimum that you have to understand. And there's a lot of information that you need to be up to speed with. Then what sits underneath that is codes of practices, Australian standards and guidance material. Now, even though your codes of practice, Australian standards and guidance material is deemed is relevant, it's not law, but however, if there is a breach, and unfortunately if you end up in court, then all this information can be used as evidence in a court of law. So how they affect your workplace. As I said, the Act defines the requirements and duties in relation to health and safety. And what you need to do, as I said, the Act tells you what you must do. There is no ifs or buts about it. It's law. It's written by lawyers, and it can be hard to understand. If you don't quite understand, you might need someone to help you comply with those areas. As I said, the regulation tells you how to do it, how to comply with the Act. As I said, they're both law, and then your guidance material. So that's just a little snapshot that's used in a lot of training, where the top of the pyramid is the Act, and then right down the bottom is your guidance material. So guidance material includes your policies, procedures, SWIMs, your JSAs, your management systems and plans, et cetera, et cetera. So the health and safety, as I said, it's law. I know it's a bit of a repeat on these couple of slides. However, it's very, very important you understand when it comes to law, that's the minimum requirements. There is no wriggle room, and that's the bare bones of how do you operate a business, excuse me, and what is required within your systems. So most companies and businesses need to actually expand on the Act and regs to give you a little bit of wriggle room and a methodology of how to run your business effectively. The good thing about this legislation is it's very proactive and it's all about outcomes. And the subtle changes is by bringing in what is so far as reasonably practical, makes it a lot easier to run businesses and meeting your compliance under the Act and regs. So there's a link there to that you can find the information if you need to grab a copy. But on the Safe Work website, you can get a copy of the Act, the regulations, and all your codes of practices. They're free, and I suggest that you get a chance to at least download them and have a chance to look at them. Okay. I'm not going to go into too much depth. This is just a snapshot out of the Act, okay? And it talks about what is reasonably practicable, okay? So it's basically what can be done in a particular point in time, you know, like taking a snapshot, like taking a photo, and what is reasonably able to be done in relation to ensuring health and safety, right? So taking account and weighing up all the relevant matters, and it's defined in section 18. So when I talk about sections through this presentation, anything that talks about sections, that's related to the Act. If I talk about chapters, then it's going to be out of the regulations. So that's just a bit of a snapshot. I'm not going to read line by line for you, but what is reasonably practical makes it a lot easier to run a business. And you need to actually do a risk assessment, so identifying your hazards and risks to enable you to prove that you've done everything that is reasonably practicable. So duties apply to everyone. So in there, you've got the officer. So the officer is the big cog there in those wheels. So the officer is the person that owns the business, but also anyone that has a very specific duty under the Act that has, we're going to talk about it a little bit further, but someone that's related to the business. So it could be the director, it could be the WHS manager, but someone in senior management would be more than likely deemed an officer. Then underneath that, you've got workers. So workers under the definition of this Act are everybody that's, could be the actual workers, the employees, or they could be a subcontractor working for the principal contractor, which means that in a subcontractor's point of view, even though you're an officer of your own business, if you're working as a subcontractor, then you're wearing two hats basically. One is your own business responsibilities, and you're also responsibilities as a worker because you're taking directions from a principal contractor. Others is everybody else. So they're your visitors and the public in a nutshell, okay? And I think we talk about these a little bit further as we go through. So yeah, so which parts of the Act that apply here? So principles that apply to duties. We're going to talk about duties that cannot be transferred to another person. So there's very specific responsibilities under the Act. So that's between section 13 all the way through to section 17, tells you the basic principles of the duties that apply to all people. In particular, that what people have to understand when they're running a business, that your duties cannot be transferred to another person. In other words, if you are the business owner and you engage someone like a safety manager or a project manager or someone like that to carry out certain duties within your business, then you can't say that I've employed these people and therefore I'm not responsible. It still always falls back. So everybody may have dual duties, or shared duties, that's what it's called under the Act, but you cannot offset those responsibilities, all right? So talking about the levels or defining levels of responsibility, this is just a little bit of a snapshot or a bit of a table just breaking up into different concepts. So the nature of an activity, so in look at the top line there, the operation of the business or undertaking. So in other words, that used to be the business, right? So now it's called a PCBU. They have a primary duty of care, which is section 19 under the Act. And the level of responsibility is going to come down to what is reasonably practicable. It's one of the best changes in the legislation because being reasonably practicable, the old legislation was very black and white, and it was almost impossible to meet your requirements. Now you can meet your requirements, but it's through being diligent in your work activities, but also about taking reasonable care of both yourself and your workers, and providing all the necessary requirements in your workplace. So I'll go on this one a little bit further, because a lot of people misinterpret what this part is, but these are the main penalties and offences. These are only the applicable fines, the maximum fines that can be appointed in court. So if you end up in court, there's 3 levels of penalties. So one falls under reckless conduct. So that's exposing someone to a risk or serious injury or illness. Could be a death in a workplace. But that means that you're running a business without having all the proper paperwork, systems, and infrastructure within your business to carry out that particular work activity. So a worker or an individual, the fines come down to $300,000 and or 5 years imprisonment. So if you don't follow those policy and procedures as a worker, then these are the fines that the judge can put into practice. And PCBU, the business itself and the officer within the business, and there could be multiple officers, is now $600,000 and or 5 years imprisonment, and a corporation is $3 million. Now those point units, which up the top there says 30,000. So basically for every point is $100. So if you're going through the act and it might refer to dollars, it may refer to the point units. Then if it says 1 point unit, then that's a $100 fine. If it says 100 points, it's a $1,000 fine. To go right down to the bottom of the scale is failure to comply with a duty. Now, this is any breach under the legislation. So an individual or worker can be fined up to $50,000 for failing to comply. That means by not following a procedure that they've signed off and said that they will do. The PCBU and officer, these are personal fines, mind you. These aren't paid by companies. The PCB or the officer can get fined up to $100,000 and $500,000 for the corporation. So that's failure to comply with any duty under the Act. But as I said, these are the maximum fines set by the courts. And as we all know, it's up to the judge, and the judge can make his opinion on that. So those fines with the judges also, depending on the size of the business, he doesn't want to put a business out of business. Unless it's reckless conduct, he may. However, what he'll look at is the size of the business will depend on the penalty that he issues, enough to make an impact on the business rather than sending the business belly up or putting someone out in the street. So that's the basis behind it. So your primary duty of care for a business is Section 19 of the Act. It talks about you must provide a safe work environment, you must provide safe plant and structures, safe systems of work, safe use, handling, storage of plant, all structures and substances. So materials handling for hazardous chemicals or dangerous goods is a big one to think about, how you manage that. Making sure you've got the right facilities or adequate facilities for your workers. So depending on the amount of workers you have, depends on the type of facilities you're going to have to provide. So whether it's accommodation in sheds or whether it's accommodation in office building, associated to that workplace, but you need to make sure that that's provided. You also, as a business, you must provide information, so keeping everybody up to date within your business. Also making sure that everybody is trained or has the appropriate training for the work that they carry out, and they are given adequate instructions or they are supervised in that work. So, and one area that most people forget about, work health and safety, when they talk about, is not just safety. So work relates to the workplace or the safe work environment. Health defines the individual's health and making sure that you've got a healthy environment for those workers to work in. So clean air, good drinking water, they are a fit for purpose of work, so they're not under the influence of alcohol and things like that. You can expand on these a lot more, but as I said, for tonight we're just going through point forms there. But monitoring of health in your workplace, especially at the moment with COVID-19, is you need certain provisions in your workplace to manage that. So how do you meet your obligations? So meeting obligations, the these dot points here is talking about you have to identify your hazards, you know, in relation to health, safety of workers. Right? Now, under this legislation, employees are called workers, but they could be also contractors or you could be a subcontractor for a principal contractor. You've got to monitor for compliance against the legislative duties. You've got to do investigations if there's complaints from workers or from external parties or the public or other peoples that may make a complaint. So you must have regular WHS audits and site inspections to prove that you are managing WHS correctly. You also need to identify and determine WHS training needs. Okay. The monitoring practices and activities, non-compliance and education. So it's very important that you need, when you do a risk process or risk management assessment, that it is monitored on a regular basis. If you can't prove that you're doing the monitoring part of it, then there's the high possibility of, if an inspector turns up, there could be fines that may be applicable for that. Improving your workplace policy and procedures, that means you've got to update them on a regular basis as your business changes or grows. Okay, if it doesn't change or grow, you still need to review them on a regular basis. Generally, it's 12 monthly or 2 yearly, depending on the size of the business. Ensuring your WHS records are completed correctly. Right? It's extremely important that if you have systems and paperwork, that you follow your policy and procedures and you do complete your paperwork correctly. You need to cross the T's and dot the I's, as they say. If you have proper paperwork, you are fairly well protected. And making sure that you monitor your workers for compliance. So there is additional duties there. I'm not going to go in too much in complex details in this, but additional duties of PCVs. We had our primary duty of care, section 19. Then you need to look at section 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. So there are additional duties that PCBUs must, as far as the Act's concerned. These are different areas that you need to be compliant with. So talking about the management control of your business, talking about the workplace itself, how you manage hazardous substances or goods. Also talking about plant and equipment that's in your workplace, whether it's hired in or whether you own it, and how things are installed or constructed or commissioned. So they're very important things you need to remember. Okay, so duty of an officer. So the definition of an officer falls under the section 27 of the Act. So in broad terms, an officer is a person who makes or participates in making decisions that affect the whole or substantial part of the financial standing or the organisation's business activities. So that's your business owner, as I said, WH managers. Sometimes it could be your project manager, depending on the size of your business. So it's keeping up to date with all your paperwork, keeping up to date with legislative requirements, understanding business activities, risks, also that all those resources and processes are made available and people do follow those policy and procedures. So verifying provision and use of resources and processes is a key part. So I suggest you look at if you do fall under section 27 or the definition of an officer, because it does put you in, as you would remember from the previous slides, a much higher penalty regime than just a worker. So the definition of a worker, section 7, okay? What are the duties? Look at section 28. As I said, the S stands for section, so that means you're related to the Act. So have a look at, in particular, as I said, if you're a business and you're working as a subcontractor, you could be an individual, you could be a sole trader, you could be a volunteer, you could be an apprentice or a trainee. They all come under the definition of a worker, and there's very specific responsibilities under section 7, which talks or defines who's a worker, but the duties of a worker you'll find under section 28. So that tells you the responsibilities that those workers have to comply with. So there's a snapshot straight out of the Act, section 28, duties of workers. All right. So while at work, a worker must take reasonable care of his or her own health and safety. Take reasonable care that their actions or omissions do not adversely affect others, and comply so far as reasonably practicable for any reasonable instruction or business activity that or the business that they're working for. Cooperate with any reasonable policy or procedures. Those policy and procedures are part of the business, right? So it's very important that when you're working for a business, you are signing off when you are inducted within that business that you will follow those policies and procedures. Other persons, the definition of other persons in the workplace. So these are people that are outside of direct employment from the business. So your visitors and others also include the public or anyone that may enter the workplace but not actually carrying out physical work within your business. You also got to remember is a person that enters your place of work must be inducted into your workplace, whether they're a visitor, whether they're a worker, or whatever that case may be. Even truck drivers need to be inducted. Now, there's different levels of inductions that we can talk about at another time, how to manage a business, but you need to take in anyone that enters your workplace has to have some form of instruction or induction process, whether they're an actual worker or whether they're a visitor. So someone like myself, if I came in and did an audit and my tool of trade is a pen, then I must be inducted. I must have a white card or general induction training. So the business or the piece of you must take responsibility of their workplace and who enters their workplace and must provide that safe work environment. That's it in a nutshell. All right. So that level of responsibility we spoke about before, it's remembering the duties of officers' duties, workers' duties, and you'll find the level of responsibility, you can see at the end there, what is reasonably practical for the operation of the business. The officer's duty is due diligence, so there is there isn't really no wriggle room for an officer. He has very specific duties, and it's called due diligence, which he must act and put into practice. The workers have what they call is reasonable care. So in other words, you must follow procedures, must follow any systems or paperwork that is applicable for that job. Okay. Yeah, so the contractors are defined of those who are contracted to do a specific task. Now, you could be employed to come and just do some tiling or some painting or plastering work, or multiple duties. You may be coming in doing all the petition work, which includes the framing, the setting out the framing, the petition, the insulation, and the painting. But the definition of a contractor is someone who's basically under a contract to carry out very specific work in a specific time period. So they could be securities, cleaners, special staff, tradespeople, etc. Okay. We spoke about before, Section 19 talks about the piece of you, the primary duty of care, and the worker is Section 28. Most businesses, I would say that if you're going to run any business, especially in construction or building works, whether it's residential or commercial, industrial, or whatever the case may be, is you must have a safety plan. All right? It is required by law that if you carry out work over $250,000, now that $250,000 doesn't necessarily mean your contract value, that is the total cost of a project. So you've got to remember is that your contract may be $200,000, but there might be $50,000 worth of consultancy fees, architects' fees, engineers' fees. So that what builds it up to the $250,000. I would suggest that any business, regardless of your size, you have a safety management plan or management system, depending on the size of your business. Now, your safety plan, you can split into a couple of different categories. Got someone on speaker. So basically, the company needs to have unknown caller. Sorry about that. Someone's chasing me at this time of night as well. So safety plan, a business must have a safety policy. They must have a risk management process. that risk management process, it says there should include, or I'd say must include, hazard identification processes, risk assessment processes, risk control processes, and risk control review processes. They're all processes which formalise part of that risk management part of the safety plan. The safe work method statements, right? SWMS is the common name. So that's basically a document that tells you how to carry out very specific work activities in a safe way with very specific control measures in place to minimise the risk factor associated to that work. It's very, very important that if you have a safe method statement, it is a legal document and will be used in a court of law, and the regulator will use the safe work method statement if they're going to be checking on a workplace to see that you are doing what you say you are going to carry out or do. You are signing a legal document when you sign off on the SWMS. Job safety analysis, that's basically if you want to put it down as it's almost like the prelude to a safe work method statement. So the job safety analysis, or JSA is commonly called, is the safety analysis for a particular activity, where the work method statement tells you how to do the work, tells you how to do it in a very specific order, like a sequential methodology approach, what are the risks associated to it, and what controls you put in place to minimise or eliminate those risks. Businesses must have a training matrix, right? So in other words, every person within a business, you need to clarify that that person is qualified to carry out that work. So in other words, it should match their job descriptions or their HR agreement. Okay. The copies of all qualifications and licenses. You need to keep track of all qualifications and licenses of all your employees and your contractors, subcontractors, and anyone that enters your workplace. You must manage any injury statistics. So monitoring all your safety procedures, any first aid treatments, or any hospital or incidents that come up. You must have an injury management process within the business, and you must have a rehabilitation and return to work process, which is a work cover requirement, safe work requirement. So when it talks about inductions, you have 3 levels of inductions basically. So the first one's called a general induction. General induction is commonly called your white card. Okay, or so your white card, you cannot work on a construction site if you haven't got a white card. Okay, now a white card, if you don't carry your white card with you and an inspector walks in and asks for a copy of that, that's like getting pulled over by the police and not having your driver's license. You will get fined. Okay, so you must have a general induction training card, GIT they call it, and as I said, to enter a workplace or carry out any form of work. Now, that's like myself. I've got to have a white card, and primarily when I go out and do inspections now, my tool of trade is a pen. Therefore, it is deemed a work activity. Right? So don't think it's a physical work activity of wearing a nail bag. It means anyone carrying out work. Okay. Company induction, most companies now do a company induction. It's like an online induction before you start work. That minimises the amount of site-specific induction. So it means you go through all the company's policy procedures and you agree that you will follow all those policies, procedures for that company or principal contractor. A site-specific induction is the person that's the control of the workplace by law must conduct a site-specific induction to inform anyone that enters that workplace of any hazards or risks that they may be exposed to. Also, going through the policies and procedures, site amenities, any special rules or site conditions, emergency procedures, evacuation procedures, all the safety requirements. They must address their safe work method statements, SOPs, standard operating procedures. I call them safe operating procedures, RAs, or risk assessments, etc. Those contractors must review their SWMS. They must be site specific. Just by putting an address or contact address and name on a SWMS does not make it site specific. So be mindful that you understand the basic principles of a safe work method statement, because that is one of the documents that the regulator will look at if there's an incident or accident, or if he just pops in to have a bit of a walk around. Emergency plans have to cover medical emergencies, any fire emergencies, evacuations, bomb threats, etc., etc. So that's basically what's covered in those points. So WHS key points. Everybody, as I said before, everybody has a duty to work safely, not only for themselves, but for others that work around them. Some people have different levels and duties, and some of those different duties or levels of authority will have certain levels of accountability. Penalties for non-compliance with the regulator are enforceable, but the penalties, the inspector can issue penalties over and above what's written in the Act. So if you happen to open up the Act, you can just look at a couple of items we've spoken about before, Section 19 and 27 and 46 and 47. We'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later. But the contractors need to understand that the regulator, or sorry, the inspector for the regulator can actually issue over and above personal fines as well. And they can vary anywhere from $600 to $10,000 personal fines on top of the legislative fines if they find there's a breach of accountability. So understanding documents that you must have. So in a nutshell, we've just got some pictograms here. You have to manage all your hazardous substance dangerous goods, and there's very, very specific categories within the Act. So you'll be looking at, let me think, chapter of the regulations, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and schedules 11, which will cover pretty much all these. So first aid requirements. So your first aider on the workplace now decides what goes into the first aid kit, and the first aid kit has to be applicable to the size of the job, or the type of work that they're doing, or the exposure that they may come across. Quality monitoring, so monitoring the air quality or the environment, the electrical testing and tagging, fire extinguishers, and PPE. So it's very important to understand that the PPE has to be fit for purpose, right? You can't just issue someone a standard kit if it doesn't actually comply to a particular job. Okay. Other records you have got to keep. So there's quite a, this is just a snapshot again, audit inspections, okay? Any form of meetings or agendas, WHS requirements, training records, we spoke about. KPIs, key point indicator reports. So they normally kick in at sign-offs for quality control. Risk management registers, dispute resolution processes you must have in place. You must have WHS entry permit holders understanding who's who can enter your workplace. Incident or accident investigation records, okay? One of the key things you remember is that the inspector has more power than the police. So they can enter a workplace and they don't need permission. They can record and they can take photos, and you haven't got anything to say about it. So they have more power than the police, and so it's pretty important that you understand that they do have a lot of power in the workplace. Okay. So obviously the main aims of any WHS management system, that's what WHS-MS stands for, Work Health and Safety Management System, is obviously to reduce the exposure to anyone that from an injury or from an illness associated to that workplace. And that goes, you can see down there, there's another list down there about continued improvements, documentation, management of how you, and rehabilitation and how you process claims, to ensure that all your process or your workplace is safe, and also has an ethical ethical standards within that workplace. Contracts are secured, and you've got to minimise industrial relation issues, and that can be obviously minimised or eliminated if you have a good, safe workplace. So risk management, it's all about risk. and who's responsible for taking actions to eliminate any health and safety risks to yourself or to others. That's it in a nutshell. So, so risk management is, assessing all the hazards and risks within the workplace and putting in some form of action or some form of control measures to either eliminate or minimise that exposure. So if you want to look at duty holders, so work health safety, look at section 34 to 35, and it's going to give you some more definition there. But it's very important that the PCBU and your work health and safety advisor, if you have one, develop and implement a risk management procedures into your WHS management system. Okay. So risk management is pretty primarily about consultation. So one is identifying your hazards, two is assessing the exposure to risk, putting in those control measures and doing a monitoring review. And that monitoring review is a constant thing. As it says there, it's about a consultation throughout all different stages with, and as your workplace or the environment changes, whether it's weather, whether it's people, scope of works or contract changes, you need to review this process. It is a strict requirement, and there is a section 46 and 47 that relates to fail to consult. Okay. So the consultation process, it's all about quality assurance, engineering controls, machine operations or administrators, and you sort of see the list there. Technical specialists like your WHS team or HSRs, health safety representatives, your foreman or supervisor, material handling or handlers, and maintenance and personnel. And if you do have a safety manager, that there's a responsibility there as well. So consultation is a 360 environment. So in other words, everybody needs to know what's going on and kept in that loop. So it is a requirement under legislation, and that's where HSRs become a great tool or a person to sit in that position, which can greatly assist a business having a HSR on board. So hierarchy control, when I talk about hierarchy control, this is talking about how to manage your hazards and risks. Okay, so the principle behind it is your primary goal is to eliminate any hazard. It's very, very hard in any business to eliminate hazards, right? Yes, it is possible, but it's very, very limited. If you can't eliminate, then you've got to go down the hierarchy, which means you'll look at substitution, right? So maybe changing a particular product or substance to a less hazardous one. It's one example. Isolation, putting up barriers or fencing or control measures that way. Engineering is to do with plant and equipment, okay? Administration and to do with training or procedures or systems within your business. PPE talks about anything that's attached to your body. So if it could be shirts, it could be boots, socks, clothing, eyewear, helmets, safety harnesses, etc. To keep it into a concept is, not your primary goal is number one, elimination. 2, 3, and 4 is all to do with your workplace. So if you think of those 3 elements as workplace related, 5 and 6 is to do with people. Okay, so that's how you break it up in those 3 categories. Very, very important, this one is to talk about notifiable incidents within a workplace. The legislation is very, very strict on making sure that you comply with this one. If you're not sure, I suggest you look it up. You'll find it under section 35, 36, 37, 38. All right, so that's going to tell you what is deemed a notifiable incident and when the regulator needs to be contacted. Okay. The other thing is, if you are requested or you need to preserve the scene, then you're going to be looking at section 39 of the Act. Okay. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. But it's very, very important, if you do not notify the regulator and someone else notifies the regulator, it could be just a phone call or it could be a third party or someone in the street makes that phone call, and you don't notify the regulator first, then you will get a fine. Right? maybe not one fine, it could be multiple fines. Because if you're a subcontractor, you may wear multiple hats. Okay. Generally, incidents happen when systems fail or when people don't follow those systems. So this is just a snapshot, breaking it down into the core elements. An incident will not happen, or an incident doesn't happen unless there's a failure somewhere. Now, whether it's because the system was poor, or whether people didn't follow the system, or whether it was just someone doing the wrong thing. Okay, contracts. So contracts and changes and amendments, you need to keep control of all this. It's an obligation. It's also a requirement not only for the Building Act, but it's also certain very, very defined definitions of responsibilities of managing your contracts and administering those requirements. Okay, this one here is just a very quick snapshot. It's talking about defining a boss and a leader. You can sort of see there on the left, and then versus a leader. If you want to run a good business and a healthy business, you need to take the attitude or the principles of the leader rather than the boss. So you are the boss, but you need to, if you want your workplace to run smoothly and everybody to work in harmony within your business and have good outcomes, then you need to have that positive attitude and work across the board. So that's just a snapshot, just to help you understand about the main differences between a boss and being a leader or a good person controlling your workplace.
Okay. It's toward the end of the presentation, so let's have a look the question we have. So as I can see, the first one is, as we all know, after the scaffold incident happened last year, Safe Work New South Wales started to pay extra attention to our building and construction industry, especially our site safety issues. So would you mind share some thoughts with our members, especially the builders and subcontractors, about this kind of issues?
Yeah, sure. Well, primarily, there's Australian standards for scaffolding, and even though your scaffolders may come in and build a scaffold for you, they have to provide all the necessary paperwork that says that the scaffolds meet the standards or compliance. Yep. In saying that, there's many scaffolders out there that will sign off paperwork and it's not really the best type of scaffold anyway. Yep. So there is a responsibility. I know it's hard to take, but you as the principal or whoever's your supervisor has to feel comfortable in the activities you carry out. You cannot just rely on the paperwork if you know that it's not built properly. Right? Sure. So, and very strict penalties apply to that. And in saying that, as you probably noticed, there's been quite a few incidents involving scaffold collapses or what have you. And a lot of it is either due to poor installation to start with, yep, or what's happened is people modify the scaffold because it's not controlled properly by taking out ties and bracing, yep, and think, oh, well, it's only one tie here, one tie there. Yep. But then someone else says, oh, it's only one tie. And you have about 10 people doing, oh, it's only one tie. Next minute,
it's more than 10 ties.
There's 10 ties missing and the scaffold falls over. So the Safe Work New South Wales have put out a starting very recently, only a week ago. So they've got a blitz at the moment. Normally their blitzes run for 3 months. Mm-hmm. So the blitz at the moment is on working at heights, yep, and scaffolding is part of that. Sure. So they will be concentrating when they go to any workplaces. And generally, if there's a scaffold up on a job, yep, it's a red flag to a bull. So if they're driving down, they see a scaffold, yep, and some scaffolds stand out that they're not very well built, yep, you'll probably get an inspection or you get them to walk in and fines will follow. Sure. So you need to be very diligent as a business to ensure that before anyone works on a scaffold, that it's not only is it signed off, but it's checked by a competent person. Sure. So
not only tagged or or certified, but
Yeah.
also need to double check.
Double check. And regular inspections, and they could be daily or weekly.
Yeah.
But by law, the scaffolders have to recertify the scaffold every 30 days.
Every 30 days.
Every 30 days
Okay.
by law.
Yep.
So you need the paperwork, and also then at these wherever the scaffolds are accessed from,
Yep.
like the stair point normally,
Yep.
is you'll find what they call a scaff tag,
Yep.
and that has a certification number on it.
Yep.
And the paperwork you'd have filed somewhere to marry that.
Yeah.
But the standards calls up that every time it rains, or especially if the scaffold's on ground or dirt, then the scaffold has to be re-inspected.
Really?
If there's been really strong winds or things like that, the scaffold has to be re-inspected. That's the law. But a lot of people don't worry about it. They just wait till the end of the month. And that's when other problems happen. So
actually, they don't wait for another month. They wait. It starts to collapse.
That's it.
Yeah. So it's not good at all.
No.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see the second question. What we have is how to do the induction. How often do we need to do the site induction?
As soon as anyone enters the workplace.
So what you're saying is like
once the first time that someone has to work in the workplace, they must be inducted.
Right? And as far as the new tradies getting to the sites, you need to do the induction.
Yes.
Okay.
So you've got to be careful that you have you set your site up really well.
Yep.
As far as the positioning and management of your workplace, because if anyone enters your workplace, and most people leave their gates open, if they haven't been inducted and your site's not set up properly, technically they're entering a workplace, but they're not inducted. So if they injure themselves, or an inspector comes in, they expect multiple fines. So once they're inducted, they don't have to be re-inducted unless they cause a breach or non-conformance. Then you may have to re-induct them, because if you don't take action, then that's another breach under the Act for not doing due diligence in ensuring that if they do the wrong thing, you haven't pulled them up on it.
What about for the guests or the delivery guys?
Yeah, so that includes truck drivers, deliveries, trucks that come in for your hire gear. Anyone that enters the workplace needs to be inducted. Now, you can have, so you've got your main induction process, which means people carrying out work like electricians, plumbers, plasterers, tradies, blah, blah. Then you may have visitors, so you may do what they call a visitors induction, which means you just briefly go around that, but then they still have to be escorted. So a visitor must be escorted around your workplace. Truck drivers, you can probably, there's two ways. You can induct them, or you can do what I used to do was a truck driver induction. It's a very brief induction.
Just show where they are.
So they understand the conditions of the workplace, but they cannot go around, they cannot get out of their vehicle.
True.
Right? So unless they obviously need the amenities, but then they've got to pull up at the... Yeah, sure. Yep.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one. What documents must subcontractors provide when they enter a new site? Oh, that's a good question.
The contractors themselves?
To show I think to show the builders or the main contractor.
Right. Depending on the business, depending on the size of the job. Now, some principal contractors will say, we want to see a safety management plan.
Okay.
Right? So, because they may have a back-to-back contract. Right? Others will say, we need to see just your safe work method statement for that particular work. So if it's only a minor job, like going doing tiling or a bit of carpentry work, they say, we need to see the safe work method statement. So they need to provide that. But a lot of people will give that safe work method statement and go and work. Now, whether it's myself, if I'm doing an inspection, or whether it's an inspector, one of the first questions you're going to ask is, just look at your swims, and they go, yep, okay, I noticed you weren't doing X, Y, Z, why? Oh, we don't do it. I said, sorry, that's a legal document. You have to follow it, you're going to get fined. If you sign off that the safe work method statement is now site specific, by just putting your name and address in there, you'll get fined. Right? Swims cannot be deemed site specific unless a risk assessment is carried out prior to starting.
Yes.
Now that can be very simple. It could be just a quick 5-minute toolbox talk. So the supervisor just says X, Y, Z. We need to be careful of X, Y, Z. Or there's no changes. Go to work. So it's covered through a toolbox talk. That's still a risk assessment.
Okay. Usually, who will do the safety plan?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the safety plan, depending on the size of the business, again, if you've got a WHS manager in your business, they would do it. If not, then you would then, yeah, or you can get an external consultant to write one for you.
Right.
Now, there is packages out there, but I call them standard off-the-shelf packages.
Yep.
Which may get them out of trouble. However, you've got to be very careful because they may not, even though they meet their legal requirements, it may not be balanced out against their business activities, which means can leave them open for fault. Right? So I would suggest that if they get one off the shelf, that they have someone review it to make it specific to that business.
That would be you, I believe.
Oh, even myself, there's other people out there that do it, but because there is a lot of companies out there that will provide that. Now, if they do government work, state work, or whatever, then it's a minimum requirement. You must have a management plan, irrespective of the size of the job.
Okay, yeah. Because as I know, MBA or HRA, they provide those kind of, they call package, safety package. There's a lot of documents you need to fill out.
Now, as you mentioned before, like I used to work for the MBA.
Yeah.
And their current systems and what have you, my personal opinion is it is extremely bare bones, right? So
too broad.
It's too broad. It's too general because basically they write their management plan or systems that covers all businesses, right? So if you're just a gyprocker, say, or a plumber or a tiler, then that system's too big for you, right? So and if you're only a one-man band, you won't be able to be compliant because you probably need 5 people to run that plan, right? So sometimes you need to balance out.
Yeah.
So you just want to be careful. Yes, buy it if you need to get a job straight away, but then get someone to help you
to review
to refine it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move to the next question. What kind of process to do or to check for the site WHS audit?
Okay. So a site audit or WHS audit is pretty much where you go in. Different auditors do different things. When I audit a job, I break it up into categories. So I've got 22 categories that go from a site walk. A site inspection is normally the primary one. And then you look at their systems and their paperwork, and you look at what the activities they've been doing, and you cross-reference that to their systems. So if they've got, say, half a dozen contractors working for them, then I might say, show me the plumber or the gyprocker's safe work method statement, and I say, well, that's non-compliant or whatever. So you pick up where there's shortfalls or where they need to improve to get them up to a compliance level or better safety level.
So let's say we go to the sites, you only see like the plumber and the electrician work over there. Would you ask for bricklayers' work safe statements? Or
if they've been submitted, I could on an audit.
Okay, so
but then again, they may be submitted, but if they're not working yet, I would suggest that the business, and this is what best advice I can give people, get as many contractors that you're going to be working for you, and whatever those trades are, get them to submit them, but don't sign them off as being okay to work. So you only sign them off as being compliant. So compliant to the legislation. So it's got to tick certain boxes. Then before they start work, you do that risk assessment. You make them do a risk assessment and then re-sign off on the swims, and then it becomes compliant. So that's what. Depending on the size of the business, if you've got the pro formas or the like the templates. Then I would suggest that depending on the other companies you're working for, or the subbies that are working for the business, here's our template. That's what we want you to fill out. So it makes it easier for the builder. They're not looking at all these different types of
different
so they can just say, oh yeah, but this is our swims. Okay, we want you to take the information out of your swims and stick it into our template. But generally, some of the bigger builders will do that. Some of the smaller builders, but there is a process that's you've got to be careful, because if you miss one of those steps, you can be extremely liable if something goes wrong or someone gets injured.
Yeah.
Okay, so the key element is that one is it's got to be legally compliant, so there's a minimum requirement for swims.
Yeah.
Second is that it needs to be site specific, and as I said before, just by putting the address name in there and a supervisor's name does not make it site specific. If you cannot prove that you've done a risk assessment, and especially if someone's been injured or an inspector's just doing a random check, you will get fined.
Wow. Okay.
If you get someone in like myself or auditors that come in, they would point all these faults out, and there'll be recommendations what you need to fix to get you up to a compliant level.
Right.
That's it. The basis, a lot of people get scared of audits.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to a WHS audit, it's helping the business to identify all their shortfalls and what they need to fix.
And help them to improve it. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
The next question. Right. Of course, we will try our best to prevent the incident from happening. But what about after the incident happened? What would be the standard of procedures?
Yeah.
Like,
well, basically, you have to have a procedure for risk management procedure or emergency procedures.
Yep.
It's a requirement under the Act. So the business must have a list or a set procedure.
Yep.
If an incident happens, this is step one, all the way through to the final step. And if it's a notifiable incident, that's that section 35 through to 38.
Yep.
Then you must contact the regulator. Now, the legislation says you must contact the regulator immediately. Right? Now, the definition immediately, don't panic. If someone's injured and they go off in an ambulance, you ring them after they leave. You don't. If they've cut a hand off, you don't ring the regulator first. You don't need to.
You grab the hand first.
Make sure that you've got plenty of time. But if they go to hospital and they become an inpatient, the hospital by law or a doctor by law, if they say it's workers' comp, will contact the regulator.
Right.
And then the regulator, if he gets the contact by a third party before you ring them, you will get a fine. And you'll get a visit as well. And then from that visit, could lead to other fines.
So better after the ambulance.
You're better off just ringing the regulator and say, look, we've had an incident. We're not sure what the outcome is, but just for safety reasons, we've called the ambulance and we'll let you know if it's going to be a notified incident. We're not sure yet. And they normally will say, well, thanks for the notice. Let us know of an update. So if they don't become an inpatient, you can ring the regulator and say, look, that incident I rang about, blah, blah, blah. It's okay, he's back at work, and that's it. Okay? But you've got to be very, very careful. Because notifiable incident, as I said, also can be a near miss. So it doesn't actually mean that anyone's been injured. Right? So a near miss is a notifiable incident if it involves plant or equipment or electricity, irrespective if someone's being seriously injured or not. Right? So if there's an incident with electricity, then it's a notifiable incident, irrespective of whether anyone got injured or not. But look at section 35 through to 38. 39 tells you it must preserve a scene, and that's if it's a serious injury or death.
Okay, let's have a look. Any other question we have? Okay. All right. Seems like we've got all the questions asked. So if anyone has questions, please present. Otherwise, we gonna start to wrap up. Okay. By the way, I have a personal question.
Sure.
Talk about the paperwork. What the common paperwork we should prepare on sites?
Yeah, well, basically, the business itself has what they call their primary management system. Then and the sites would have what they call a site-specific management plan. Depending on the size of the business, and don't take this the wrong way, but you'd be crazy to use your company management plan for a small job. Right?
So the company management plan
covers the whole business. So if you've got a small job, then I suggest that you would pull it down to a smaller document. Right? Because you won't have the infrastructure on a small job.
Sure.
Right? So defining that would be just depending on the size of the job. Or you can build into your management plan that you may have up to a certain dollar value. We go off what they call this simple risk management process.
Yeah.
Once it goes over that value, then we work off our management plan.
Right.
As long as you've got something in place, that's what the regulator's going to look for. If you've got nothing in place, he's going to go for your main system.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
So what was the second part of that? You said...
I said also I want to ask about site preparation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very, very important that you plan your job really well, plan your site, and depending on how much spare land you've got in your project will determine how you set your job up, right? But there is minimum requirements by law. But in saying that, if you plan your job and plan your site well, you can minimize a lot of the exposure straight away. And it just means you're not necessarily spending a lot more money. It's about planning it properly and designing how you're going to do the job before you start can certainly dramatically reduce that risk exposure.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, that's one of the avenues that I go and help businesses look at their plan, look how they set the job. Because some jobs, especially units, you may have to move your amenities several times during a project.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
because it's got to move to suit the job. But in saying that, what you've got to do, you can't just sort of close one down and then rebuild it. You've got to build the other one before you close the other one down.
That's absolutely right.
And all it does is take one complaint. So, and that could be internal, could be a disgruntled subby. Generally, the subbies will complain if they're not being paid, so they'll ring 13, 10, 50. Or, as I said, something may fall from a job and someone in the public may make a phone call or see someone hanging off a building, no harness, and then make a phone call.
Sure.
So it's not necessarily internal, it's external. And all it takes is a phone call for the regulator to turn up. Unless you know the inspector really well, he'll ring you first.
That's a good,
incredible. So all my jobs, I used to find out who the inspector was, met him before I started the job, and set up that rapport to start with. And 9 times out of 10, if he believes that you're very safety conscious and see that you're really interested in protecting people, they'll make the phone call and they won't turn up. Right? But that comes with reputation. That comes with him understanding and believing that you are proactive. But that takes a little time to build up that rapport. But it's a good thing to start with because that's how I used to manage my jobs. So. And touch wood, I'll touch my head here, you can't see me. In 47 years in building, I've never received a notice from the inspector or the regulator.
Good on you.
And some of my projects have been, turning over $1 million a day. So quite big projects. So,
a lot of that happens.
Yeah. And as I said, it all comes down to if you plan a job really well. So the key elements: planning, housekeeping. You get those 2 elements.
Yes.
Housekeeping is a bit to do with planning and also to do with where you position materials handling and things like that. You get those 2, you're 98% there. Everything just falls into place. You'd be surprised how easy it is but it's about being diligent as well, about being fairly strict. Right?
Experience as well.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Right. Okay. I think time is up. It's time for us to wrap up for today's webinar. I think so. Thank you, Ross, for this wonderful speech, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Looking forward to seeing you guys again in our next event, and to all of you, have a nice evening. Thank you.
Just one more question.
Yes.
How people found the roles, just in case if looking for some.
It's on the next slide, I think.
See.
Second last slide or last slide, I can't remember.
Yeah, this one.
That's our Ross contact details. So if anyone has any question about we have this new business now. Any question about site safety, WHS, and anything regarding about the regulations, please contact Ross. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And,
thanks, Gordon.
Have a nice evening.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Carson. Bye.